Hi and welcome back to the ADF Architecture TV channel for this final presentation on UX, User Experience. My name is Grant Ronald and I am Director of Product Management in Oracle's Application Development Tools Division. Now in this final episode I want to look at patterns for building ADF applications, and in particular patterns for ensuring a very successful UX or user experience. So what is a user experience pattern? Well, let's look at a very simple example, the phone. When the phone rings, I pick it up. The person who rang me doesn't start speaking straight away. Firstly, I say hello, and then they start the conversation. There's a pattern here that we're following which makes our user interaction run much more smoothly. Now that is of course a very simple example, but when you build an ADF application, or in fact any application, there will be a common pattern of communication between the user and the application. Now these could be patterns to search for information, to compare items, or to do actions that are part of their day-to-day job. That might be something like creating a purchase order, changing employee details, or deleting an order. Now, regardless if this is an HR application or order entry app, many of those gestures such as creating, deleting, comparing, cancelling, navigation, they all have a common theme. Now, by observing users and how they complete these actions, we could suggest a best practice or a pattern on how to best complete those actions. Now, by identifying and documenting these patterns, it then helps you define a very consistent way that your application will behave. And this is very important when you think of the modular nature of ADF application development, where you can reuse interface elements such as declarative components, task flows, and even ADF mobile features. So for example, how might a user search for data? How does the autocomplete function behave? Or how do you navigate records of data? Do you keep your navigating buttons in the same place? Do you use the similar labels for similarly named things such as buttons? All of these things are patterns, and identifying these patterns helps you build very consistent UIs. So does this mean you have to start building and documenting your own patterns? Well, yes, it probably makes sense, but you can also learn from the experience we've had with Oracle Fusion applications. All these points I've raised about patterns for creating data records, navigation, auto-suggest, and things like context-sensitive help, detail on demand, all of these are patterns we've already identified for our own applications, and those patterns have been written up and are published on OTN. And given Oracle's put hundreds of man-years of investment into observing users in our usability labs, much of the UX science is already baked into the patterns and even some of the ADF Faces components themselves. So if you go to the link on the screen now, you'll be able to find the Fusion design patterns and guidelines that we in Oracle have already developed. If you select the Design Patterns tab, you'll see the tree on the left shows you some of the patterns for things such as record navigation, master detail, or data editing. Each design pattern has a decision table to help you decide when to use it, then documents a recommendation for that design pattern along with samples and links to other guidelines as well. The Guidelines tab then documents the guidelines that allow you to build the ultimate user experience. So how might you deal with displaying currency information? Do you show the currency symbol or the currency code? Do you show the code or the symbol inside the field or as part of a label? What about your save model? Do you save data, or do you in fact submit data? Should you show a confirmation dialog when you save? Maybe you need to show when the data was last saved. All of these are guidelines that help you ensure a consistent and intuitive user experience. Now, building for mobile applications brings a whole different set of user interaction patterns because of the differences that you have in user gestures and the fundamental differences of interaction on smaller devices. But the good news is we have patterns for mobile as well. So clicking on the mobile tab brings up the mobile design patterns. So where you would typically place your primary action button on a mobile page, how would you typically create a new data object in a mobile application? How might you implement search? Yet again, the research we've done and the patterns we've developed are all being pulled together into the mobile design patterns page. The final guidelines are for the ADF rich client UI components themselves. So for each of the UI components we've documented our guidelines. For example, let's take a button. When should you use an icon in the button? When should you use an accelerator key? How should you use a button to best ensure information is picked up by a screen reader? Each of these guidelines is aimed at allowing you to leverage the extensive UX research that we've performed and provided you to give you a kickstart to ensure you build highly usable, intuitive and very consistent ADF applications. So what have we learned in this episode? In a typical ADF project with many developers and stakeholders, you need to ensure consistency. So documenting user interaction patterns is very important. However, if the science behind UX is something you're less familiar with, you can leverage some of the work we've done in Oracle using our documented patterns as well. Now that doesn't mean you have to use those patterns, but they do serve as a strong grounding based on scientific research and of course are influenced by the fact that they're based around ADF Faces UI components, which is what you'll be using no doubt. So again, thank you very much for watching ADF Architecture TV channel. My name's Grant Ronald.